Right. Hello. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live lesson. We're going to be talking about letting your personality shine when you're pitching in English. And today is the fifth and final lesson in our 5-lesson career series on Pearson English with me, Luke Priddy. Now, we're going to be giving everyone a few minutes to join because we're live. And because we're live, it takes it takes a couple minutes. So as you join, say where you're watching from. And if you have any initial questions, maybe I could answer one or two, right? And put in your career goal, something like that. Share something about your career journey. Now, this is going to be a slightly different lesson from what we've been doing over the past 4. In the first 4 lessons, we've been, I would say, very focused on the interview process specifically, right? And we will be today too, but there are some slightly bigger things that I think you may get out of today's lesson because pitching, well, what is that? I'm going to talk about what that is. This idea is something that you can use in many areas of life and work, right? The ability to present things well, right? It's part of the interview process, yes, but you can use it all over the place, okay? Again, my name is Luke. Welcome. Good to have you. I see we have people joining already. As I said, we're going to just give it a few minutes to let more people join so that nobody misses anything. We're going to be over here on the slides. I'm going to be going through our objectives for today in a moment. We're especially going to be talking about how you can, in the interview process, pitch yourself and what that means exactly. And talk about your professional experience. How can you present that in an engaging style? So, a lot of things to talk about for sure. We have more people joining. Yes, so as you join, say where you're watching from. Samuel is joining from Nigeria. And let's see, Manuel from Cairo and Teco from Argentina. Asma, where are you joining from, Asma? And Abby is joining from the UK. I've heard of it. All right. And again, we're just going to give it another minute before we get into the objectives. And thank you all so much to those who have joined for all of the lessons so far. What a journey, right? What a journey. It's been quite an adventure through the job interview process. We've covered how to introduce yourself and how to prepare for questions. We've talked about how to talk about your strengths and weaknesses, how to answer those. We went into more advanced, complicated questions and how to discuss those things, as well as how to ask questions. We've talked about quite a few things in our series so far, and it's been, I think, quite a journey. So, again, we have more people joining. Wonderful. From Pakistan, says Asma, and Kasaya is here. Thank you, everybody. Great to have you. Now, you can watch wherever you're watching, of course, but we're also on other platforms. We're on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube, so you can watch on all of those. And let's see. If you haven't seen the earlier lessons, I would recommend you go back and take a look. Katie is here, very engaging and practical information. Enjoy heaps. Glad to hear it. Yasin says hi. Hello, Yasin. Okay, well, why don't we get into our lesson for today? We're going to cover the objectives. Still, we have some more people coming in, but I think we should get into it. So what are we going to actually be talking about? Today, we're going to be learning how to see the interview overall as a pitch for yourself. Now, if you don't know what a pitch is, I'm going to explain that in just a moment, okay? We're also going to talk about how you can present your professional experience in a way that will make you memorable, right? You don't want to be one of those and then people who say basically what's in your CV or resume, and then I did this, and we did this, and then I did this. That's not going to be memorable. We'll talk about how to make it a presentation, right? Interesting to listen to, because you want to be remembered by the interviewer. You want to stand out. We're going to talk about some useful English words and phrases, of course, for interviews, as we have always done in every lesson. And we'll talk about cultural barriers. What happens when there's a faux pas? Oh, you don't know what a faux pas is? I'll explain that too. What happens when you do something that's awkward because of a cultural misunderstanding? What happens when someone says your name wrong and you want to correct them, right? Or spells your name wrong. My name is Luke. I don't know why, but when people send me messages, they always say, "Hey, Luck," Luck. And I think, okay. And then I think, oh, okay, there's a way to do this in a good way to create more interaction, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about. So let's get into it. Again, as we go along, if you have questions, pop those in. We have Alida from Bolivia, and I'm not sure I can read that name. It's YUVG. I'm sorry, I can't read that one. From Ukraine. I can't read it because I don't know how to say it correctly. That's why. Not forbidden from reading it. And Foroidun from Kurdistan. Andrea, Argentina. Wonderful. Wonderful. And on that note, a sip of ginger tea. Oh, that hits the spot. Okay. So, what is exactly a pitch? I think we should talk about this and get into what it is, right? Before we talk about how to do it, right? Just so that we're all on the same page. Charin from Malaysia, Hope from Indonesia, Rawa from Syria. Wow, we have more people. That's great. Saif from Philippines and Pakistan. Parsa, hello. Thanks for joining. Great to have you. Great to have you here. Okay, so let's get into what this is, right? Basically, I would say a pitch is when you're putting yourself out there, right? And that means you're taking a chance and communicating something to others, and generally they're going to say a yes or a no. So that's what a job interview is, right? You are taking a chance, you're answering questions, you're explaining your experience, your knowledge, your skills, and they might say no. Might say yes, they might say no. So that's what a pitch is. But you could pitch for your business to investors. You could make a pitch to your friends about where to go on vacation, right? This is a much bigger thing than just interviews, right? It's a part of the interview process, I would say, and it's important to understand as part of that process, right? So essentially, this is a pitch that you're making to an employer. I think you should hire me to do this job because that's what it is, right? And essentially, you're kind of using communication. You're using what you say in your answers to then say why that is. Why should they hire you? What makes you more qualified? What makes you a better candidate? What makes you the right fit culturally? All of that stuff is your pitch to the employer, right? That's what it is. And it's not just the information, it's also how. It's actually extremely important how you express yourself. So this is where you need to let your charisma and your character, right, your personality shine through. Don't think of this as, I need to figure out how to convince them logically to hire me. Think of it more like, I need to show them who I am, right? In English, which is more of a challenge, but you can be yourself in English, right? It's just a matter of being authentic, finding the right words and phrases, and organizing your thoughts in a way that really resonates with the interviewer, right? So, and we're going to get into this stuff, including the English part of this, but I just wanted to give you kind of the high-level overview. Teco, I want you to know I'm a teacher of English here in Argentina, so hearing you helps a lot. Great to hear it, Teco. Rohani says hello from Indonesia, and we have Gabrielle from Mexico. Adriana says hello. Thank you for putting in where you're watching from. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation, says Carlos on Facebook. Nice. Nice. And I am curious, if you want to just put into the chat, where are you on your journey? Are you just thinking about changing jobs? Are you just considering this? Are you actively looking? Are you actively interviewing? Are you you just finished an interview and it didn't go well and you think I can do better than that? Right? I want to know where you are on your journey. That would be great. So share that in the chat, please. Okay. So before we talk about the tips we need to, or the strategies rather for pitching, I want to share a few language points. These are just a couple of things that it's good to know in order to talk about your experience, in order to be memorable. Okay, so you want to be generally top of mind when the interviewer is thinking about which candidates to move to the next step. What does that mean? Top of mind. That means that you're the one that sticks out. You're the one that they say, oh yeah, remember Sandrine. She, I think that's a she. Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. She was really able to put her thoughts together well, right? She seems like she would be a really good fit, of course, based on her experience. And I think, top of mind, I think that we should interview her again or pass her on to the next stage. Connecting the dots also matters. This means you're linking together ideas and saying what things mean, not just saying things. So what does that mean? Well, if you share a personal experience about a time when you had to deal with a difficult customer, right? You don't want to just share that. You want to then connect that to what that means about you to the employer, right? So connecting the dots is a kind of key of storytelling, of saying, this is what happened, this is what I learned, this is the takeaway from that, the thing that shows you something about me, right? So that's connecting the dots. And you always want to be trying to connect the dots and not make the interviewer have to connect all the dots, right? Okay, why did he share that story? What is the point of this? Right? You can help that by connecting the dots when you're pitching, when you're talking through your experience. And doing that will make things click. So that's another great phrase. To make things click means once the dots are connected, the person who's listening to you goes, ah. So that's the click. To make something click is happening in another person's head because of what you said, right? Oh, that really, whenever you talk, whenever you explain something, it really clicks in my head. Oh, that really makes things click for me, okay? And this is also part of storytelling principles. Storytelling principles is not something we can go into with too much depth in today's lesson, but if you start thinking of sharing your experience as storytelling, then you can start thinking about maybe building up to interesting moments and adding tension, setting up the different characters or the different people involved and set the situation. You want to set the scene first and then explain what happened, right? Have a sort of a hero's journey through this difficult thing. And that doesn't mean you have to, tell a very complicated, detailed story, but thinking about basic storytelling principles, thinking about what you do as telling a story is often a good way to help people visualize what you're talking about. And then finally, call to action just quickly. Sometimes you want to throw something out to others. You want to give them something to do. And that might be to think about something. So what would you have done in this situation? I want you to think about that. And I'm not saying you should tell the interviewer to do that. It's just an example. But a call to action is when you give another person something to do, which includes thinking about it, which includes researching something, anything that you would like them to take away as a kind of action or a little bit of homework, right, for them to do. And a call to action could simply be, hire me. You don't want to say that directly, but that might be the call to action that they have in mind after you talk through your experience. Okay. All right. So, hey, we have more people joining. Great. From New Jersey, Sherlock Holmes is here. Whoa. It is an honor, Mr. Holmes. Hello. Corinne says, I'm a teacher in an international school. Elvira says, hi from Afghanistan. Richie says, from Mexico. Great to have everybody here. From Iran, Reza on LinkedIn. Awesome. And yes, guys, we are on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, and we're on YouTube, so you can join from all of those. So my question for you, what would you say is the best trait when you're pitching something? When you're trying to convince somebody of something, when you're putting yourself out there? Humor? Charisma? Organization skills? Something else? Is it the organization which makes it really interesting? Is that the key thing? Is it making jokes? Is it being charismatic? That charismatic means that you're you have a personality that shows when you're talking and you don't seem very boring. You're good at connecting with other people, right? You're good at getting your ideas across in social settings. Charismatic. You have charisma. So just put A, B, C, or D in the chat based on what you think. And if you put D, add what you think it is. Something else? Well, okay, what? What is it? Alana, hello? Reza says all, but organization helps them follow me better. I agree. Organization, very, very important. Be yourself. Bland skills. What do you mean by that, Richie Whites? Richie White says bland skills. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Definitely A. Charisma, Sandrine. Yeah, I mean, you could say any of them and then just explain which one it is based on, or you could say all of them, then talk through why you think each one is important. I think they all could be important. Lina, sorry, A and C, or is that A through C? Yeah, definitely A. I think A is your natural ability to connect, right? I think that's very, very important. Very, very important. Keep putting your answers in there. We're gonna move on. And by the way, if you do have questions throughout, we're going to be doing Q&A at the end. So we'll have a Q&A section. So if you have any, serious questions, this will be your last chance to ask these questions. So make sure you've got those in and ask those at the end when we do the Q&A. Julio says, hey, Luke, hi from Peru. Rapport with students equals charisma. I think it very much could, yes. Getting your audience or target without being boring, right? Probably, yes. All right, moving on. So how do we actually pitch well, right? I want to give you a few tips. We're going to also look at some English. We're going to talk about hooks a little bit. If you don't know what that is, all will be explained. But let's just go through a few keys for making a good pitch, right? Stress, body language, pauses. Stress, by stress I don't mean feeling stressed. I'm so stressed. That's not what I mean. I mean stress on the words that you choose. So when you speak, are you very flat? If so, probably not the best thing, because it makes people lose attention. They get bored. They start to tune out. So you want to have variation in the stress that you put on words. And if you listen to English speakers who speak really well, you will notice that they're putting individual stress on words or groups of words to emphasize them. So that's very important, to not be flat. Body language, generally speaking, depending on the setting, is very important. If you're kind of like this, or you're hunched over, or you are constantly looking around, or something like that, or you're biting your nails, you generally want to have a fairly confident body language when you're presenting something to others, right? Calm, relaxed. Using your hands is okay, but be aware of certain habits that you might have and get feedback from friends. For example, some people, when they talk, they do this, and they don't know they're doing it. And then their friends say, oh, you do this, right? And you didn't know. So you have to teach yourself, what things might be good to do and maybe things to avoid. And then pauses, that means having a little pause there right before you say the next thing. That can be a great way to collect your thoughts, to emphasize something, and really great speakers use pauses. Don't be shy about using a pause, okay? It's also very important to know how to use outlines. We won't talk about this too much, but if you can outline things, especially in your head, then you're never going to be unorganized. We talked about organization. It's very important. If your ideas are out of order and it seems like you're going in random directions, people will be confused, right? And if people are confused, then it doesn't matter how much charisma you have. They don't know what you're talking about. So if you can make an outline for example, talking through your work experience, great. If you can make it very well organized and you can talk through that, your ideas are going to be logical and clear. Better, can you do the outline in your head? If you can teach yourself how to outline stuff in your head, if you can practice that and learn it, then again, it's like having a superpower, and you're less likely to be confusing to others. Others will be able to follow your thoughts clearly. Okay? So that's something we're not going to focus on how to make outlines, because it would be for a more, I think, detailed course on presentations, but something to definitely start working on, right? When you're talking, again, do you want to just share details, or do you want to share personal stories, personal experience? Yeah, of course, you want to create empathy. You want other people to feel your experience and understand it on a deeper level, not just what you say, but actually feel something about the experience. So sharing personal stories, very important. Anecdotes is a way to express certain skills and experience that you have. If you're talking through your experience for 15 minutes, sometimes they just want you to, hey, talk through your whole career. You want to share some personal stories in there for sure to make it resonate or connect on an emotional level, right? And also, this is a simple point, but you want to try to use more active language, right? If you say that something is happening, and there's an action taking place, what language are you using, right? Are you using a static word, or are you using an active word, right? For example, if I say, I have a bad headache, is that as active and interesting as saying, I have a crushing headache? Okay, that's a little more. But how about it feels like I have 10 dictionaries on top of my head? Okay, that's a little more evocative. So just think about creative language that allows you to evoke a little bit more, and rather than using a word like great all the time, is there a more interesting word that means the same thing that's better in that situation? Okay? Again, we can't go into too much depth there, but just something to start thinking about. And then when it comes to analogies, this is what allows ideas to become more clear for people, right? An analogy is a thing that's simpler, which explains a more complicated thing. The people didn't think of it that way before, or it's complicated so they don't understand it, right? And so you give them something easier and simpler that they do understand, which that makes it much more clear. Okay? So maybe you're talking about politics and the countries and the relationships between countries, and it's so complicated. And then you want to clarify it. So you say, well, okay, let's say it's two brothers in a family. Okay. And then you can use the analogy of two brothers to make that a little more clear or explain some idea, right? So that's an analogy, and that can help. Finally, then, hooks. We're going to talk about hooks now. So a hook is right at the beginning. How do you get the attention of your audience? How do you get them to pay attention to you, listen to you, and want to keep listening? And that's what we're going to spend a little time on next, okay? I see Mondley is here. Hello. Hello. Richie, hello. Leadership skills, negotiation skills, task-oriented communication skills. Okay, I think that's in reference to the earlier question. Absolutely. Elvira says organization. Rising and falling intonation. I agree with that completely. When you rise and fall, your intonation is a little more interesting. It's not flat all the time. And Reza says past and present participles, adjectives, can help the speaker show emotions. Let me think about that. I suppose so, yeah. Hello, Alinda Portillo. Hello. Hey, so for those just joining, we are on our final lesson in our career series with Pearson English. My name is Luke Priddy, and today we're talking about how to pitch in English, pitching skills. We've just been going over some keys for pitching well. If you want to take a screenshot of that and dive a little deeper into each one of those, I would recommend it, right? I think you could spend a whole course going over each of those points, right? How do you build outlines? How do you pick the right anecdotes? How do you choose an analogy that's going to make sense to people, right? One time I was at an event for pitching. I was a judge, right? And had to give feedback to each person. And someone was trying to explain a very complicated concept and then used a dream catcher as an analogy for the complicated concept. And some people didn't know what that was. And so then she had to spend a few minutes explaining what a dream catcher was. So if you have to explain the analogy, it's not a good analogy. The analogy should make things click for people so that they can then understand the more difficult idea. Lena says, I usually advise them to use simple, clear language rather than complicated sentences because it's not the time to show your English. I think that's really good advice. It's not the time. You should be taking risks with your English and practicing things, but not in an interview, right? And that means using words you know, using words that you're familiar with, using language you're comfortable with, not taking big chances, right? I'm not sure how to make this sentence. Okay, keep it simple. It's better to be clear and well understood than to take a big risk and cause confusion. I agree with that point. Lina says, I was an education coordinator who used to hire teachers, but now I teach English to adults, help them prepare and survive an interview. Yeah, that's, I think, a great point that you share there, Lina. Okay, well, moving on. I want to get into hooks, okay? Now, what are hooks? Again, as I said, these are things right at the beginning of the thing that you're going to say when you're talking to an audience. If it's an interview, you're talking to the interviewer or interviewers, right? You have an audience even if it's one person. If you're making a presentation or a pitch, how do you grab them at the start? It's a hook. You're trying to get there. You're trying to grab them like a fish. You want them to pay attention. You're competing for their attention, right? All the time. And so there are a few ways to do it. There are actually a lot of ways to do this. I'm going to share 3 common ones. One is a hypothetical question. If you watch a lot of TED Talks, you will hear a lot of hypothetical questions. Like, wouldn't it be great if? Or what would you do if? Or imagine what would happen if, and then ask a question. Some kind of hypothetical at the beginning to activate people's imagination, right? What would you do if you had the ability to travel to Mars for $1,000? Would you be a risk taker and go and do it? Or would you stay home, stay on Earth, and never visit Mars? What would you do? So now you're at least using your imagination. I don't know what that presentation or pitch is about, but that's just one thing that you can say at the beginning to activate the imagination of the listener a little bit, right? And so maybe you want to get them to empathize with you at the beginning of your interview where you talk through your experience for 10 minutes. And you want to get them to feel something, and you want to get them thinking, right? So how would you feel if you had just immigrated to the United States, you didn't know the culture, and then suddenly you had to start interacting with customers and handling complicated situations? How would you feel? Right. I'm trying to get you to empathize with the feeling I had when I did that 10 years ago when I first started my career after immigrating, right? So that gets you to at least have something moving here. And that keeps you connected because you then want to hear the story. You want to hear how I got through that challenge, right? You can also do a show of hands, but I want to be clear, probably not. This is a general one, okay? This is something you can use more broadly. I'm not recommending you use this for interviews. So number 1 and number 3, I think, are good. Number 2, probably not. But just in general, if you are presenting something to a group of people, you can ask people to put their hand up at the start. If, for example, how many of you, right? How many of you have ever spent more than 6 months in another country? Okay. You get a few hands, then you get some results. You're getting some interaction, right? Now, if you're talking to a group of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, that's great. If you're talking to 2 people, it doesn't make sense, right? It's weird. So you might ask a direct question, right? Have you ever had to work internationally before? And then get them to answer that. That could be interesting. That could be a good way to start. But you don't want to use the just by a show of hands who here if it's 2. Okay, what about making it personal? This is a great hook where you state a little story right at the beginning to share something that shows some vulnerability, that makes people, again, start liking you, start wanting to know more about you, right? So I'm going to be talking about my experience, but maybe I start with, when I was 6, I started school and we were just studying all the time, but my grandmother always made sure that we spent time making art. Right? In school, I didn't really get to do that, and we didn't really have many opportunities to be creative. But my grandmother, who lived with us, she would always, every day after I was done with my homework, ask if I wanted to paint something together or draw something together. And that really connected me to my creative side. And I think that's what really got me into. Then you can start talking about your work in a creative field, right? So just sharing that little personal story makes people want to know more about you. It's human nature, right? People hear about personal things, they suddenly care more, right? So it can be a good idea to use that as a hook. There are many other hooks, by the way, but these are just 3 common ones that you might think about. This is more general, not just for interviews, but 3 common hooks that you can consider. Okay? Which one of these, by the way, do you think is best? A hypothetical, just in general. Hypothetical, show of hands, making it personal. Which of these do you think would connect better with an audience? What's the best type of hook to use in your view? All right. And we're getting pretty close to our Q&A, so if you've got questions, if you're thinking about some questions, you can start putting those in, and we'll definitely try our best to get to those at the end, okay? Ramsey says C. Do you want to explain, Ramsey, why that is? Making it personal. Lena says C, making it personal. Okay. And again, there are so many. Another hook is you can share a shocking fact. Did you know that 30 million people a year, did you know that 30% of adults, I think this is true, did you know that 30% of adults in the United States sleep with a stuffed animal at night? That's a shocking fact. Oh, you kind of surprise people, right? And then wake them up and then start talking. Julio says, hypothetical. Ramsey says, making a connection. How would you make that connection, though? Making it personal makes you more human. It helps the audience relate better. Yep. And again, I think a great resource for learning more about presentation skills in general is TED Talks. I really think so. Go to TED, the TED website, and watch some of go to the most popular 20 or something and watch them and learn from them. What are they doing? Why are these really good, right? Are they using humor? What kind of hooks are they using? How do they organize their ideas? Are they memorizing or not? They're not. All of this stuff can turn into little lessons, little takeaways that you can get to improve your own presentation skills. And I think it's a great place to learn that stuff. Okay. So yes, keep those answers coming. Show of hands, make it personal, or a hypothetical. Okay. So let's talk about talking through your experience. Okay, I just want to give you some ideas, and then we're going to get into some English phrases that you can use when you're doing that. Okay. So, as we talked about at the beginning, you want to be able to, if you can, make it a bit of a story. Build toward key moments, right? Don't just make it an and then thing. In a longer interview, you probably will be asked to talk through your career, right? Some interviews ask you to do that, some don't. And when you do that, if you make it the and then story, I think you're not going to be top of mind when they're looking for people to ask for the next round. But if you can tell a good story, connect your work and your life experience, build up toward important moments, set the scene, be organized, follow an outline, right? Focus on experience that taught you things, right? As well as your accomplishments. And make it sort of this balance between an interesting story and sharing what you want them to know about your skills, your experience, your knowledge, your traits, right? If you can find that balance and treat it like a real story, then I think you're going to be much more memorable, right? If you need to present things with slides, keep them very simple. That would be my recommendation, right? Try not to make them too complicated. Sometimes they will ask you to talk through some slides. Maybe they're asking you to just have some slides to present some of the projects you've worked on in the past. Okay, try your best to keep those slides simple and not too much text, not different styles mixed together, right? Just keep it clean and simple overall, right? And you want to also make sure you're aware of who you're talking to. Do a little research before the interview. Who are you talking to? Because if you know your audience, you might be able to decide not to say that complicated word that they might not know, right? Sometimes you're being interviewed by someone who wants to see if you're a good cultural fit. Their job is to figure out if you would be good on the team, and they might not know the technical stuff that you know. So if you're talking to the technical person who's interviewing you to see if technically you're going to be able to do the job well, then yeah, maybe use the jargon. Use those complicated concepts. Show off how much you know. But be aware of when maybe you're talking to someone who doesn't know that stuff. It's a waste of time to share that if they don't know that, right? If you know your audience, then you can focus more on what they probably want to know. If they want to figure out if you're a good culture fit, then maybe you want to focus on some of your experiences working with people, how you negotiate, how you handle difficulties, right? And also, you want to probably not just steamroll the whole thing, talking and talking and talking, but stop sometimes. Ask a question. Okay? Does that make sense? Or am I answering your question? Or, ask a question, a follow-up question, right? If you can ask questions, stop, pause, and have time to think, of course, that can be a good way to break it up a little bit so it doesn't feel like this just long, giant segment of you talking nonstop, right? So don't be afraid to make it a little bit of a back and forth with the interviewer. That can be a really good way to connect as well. And also, as I said, give you a little bit of time to think, okay? So that's just a couple things to bear in mind. Now, what about some phrases we can use as you're talking through your experience, right? We might use in terms of. So this is great, very simple when you want to have that or mention that topic. Well, okay, in terms of challenges that I've overcome. In terms of maybe some of the trends that I see happening in the next few years, it's a way for me to change directions, focus on different things. In terms of this, in terms of that, in terms of that. 3 different things. Could you talk a little bit about some of the things you learned last year? Oh, well, in terms of tech, in terms of handling problems, in terms of work processes, 1, 2, 3. That's great. You can do the same thing with when it comes to. When it comes to is the same as in terms of. When it comes to maybe dealing with interpersonal things, resolving personal conflicts, I tend to. Okay, so I'm saying this is my topic, and then I'm going to tell you more about it. Sometimes you might use as far as that goes, as far as that is concerned, right? So as far as my certifications go, or as far as certifications are concerned, then you can talk about some of the things that you've achieved with certifications, some of the programs that you've done, some of the maybe schools you've attended, the certificates that you've got, right? On the subject of feels a little bit like you're kind of academic and formal, so you might use that in the same way. On the subject of, and then say the thing you want to talk about, similar to the ones that we've been talking about. It's almost the same. It just feels a bit formal, and as it relates to also feels a bit formal. I would say these three, on the subject of, as it relates to, and with respect to, very similar but formal sounding. So just be aware of the different connotations of each of these. I think when it comes to and in terms of, and maybe as far as something goes, very ordinary, very common. And then on the subject of, as it relates to, and with respect to, feel just more formal. In the context of, though, is a bit different. If you say in the context of, you're putting it in a situation, right? In the context of maybe working remotely, so I'm putting it in the box of working remotely, right? I'm saying this is the thing, but specifically in this situation, in the context of working remotely, in the context of maybe collaborating when not everyone speaks English, in the context maybe of working under a tight deadline. So you're putting whatever you're going to talk about inside of a little box, and that can be that can be very useful, of course. Okay, just a few things that that might help when you want to focus on the next thing. So I'd like to ask you guys. This is, a little more involved, not our A, B, C, D, but what would be an experience that shaped your career, right? If you can use one of the phrases in terms of when it comes to, on the subject of, if you want to use one of those, that would be great. Can you give an example of an important experience that shaped your career? I would like to hear that. And we're going to get to the Q&A in just a moment. One or two more things to mention. But yeah, that would be great. Ramsey says making a connection. Reza says the tone also matters. Lina says even reading about the company you're applying for before you interview shows you're really interested. Yes, that's something we talked about in, I believe, the first or second lesson. How important research is, right? You need to be doing research. And if you're not, you don't know the company, you don't know the culture, you don't know anything about it, that's going to be probably something that gives others an advantage over you, right? Definitely, absolutely research. Research as much as you can, 100%. Okay, so an example of an important experience that shaped your career. And we're going to move on. What if there are cultural things that happen during the interview process? I just want to mention these here at the end quickly because I think it is important to keep in mind, where we live in a very international world. English is often the language to use. So a lot of us are communicating in English, but for, I would say, most people, if English is not your first language, then you might come across these misunderstandings, these awkward situations. What do you do, right? What do you do when these things happen? So let's just talk about that briefly, okay? What happens if there's a faux pas, right? Maybe you're interviewing at an American company or a British company or something like that, and you're just not aware of something culturally, right? That's actually a great opportunity to ask a question. Ask how something is usually done and be curious about it. Right? It doesn't have to be awkward if you genuinely didn't know that. So say, "Oh, could you tell me more about that? Why is that? Why do people usually do that? Can you explain that to me?" This is a great opportunity to make a connection, to show that you're a curious person, diffuse the awkwardness, right? And maybe have an interesting conversation. So it doesn't have to be this awkward thing where someone has committed a great cultural crime. That's a faux pas, this sort of little goof that goes against the cultural norm, right? And they happen all the time, right? I lived in China for quite a few years. I did 10 every day. So this is a great opportunity to learn, to ask, to connect, right? What if someone can't say your name right? That's very common, right? Quite a few names here I can't read because I don't know how they're pronounced. Or I can try them, but they're, probably saying them wrong, of course, right? Well, if we were in person or we were talking over a video call, this would be a great opportunity for you to teach me how to say it, right? And that's again a great way to connect. If I try to say your name and it's way wrong, you can say, "Okay, so actually let me teach you how to say it." "Okay, great. Teach me how to say it." And that's again an opportunity to get to know someone better, to show that you're willing to be a teacher, to show that it doesn't offend you, right? Because there are a lot of names from a lot of places. Who knows? So you have to teach people. And again, that's use that situation. Don't make it an awkward thing and say, "Oh, they didn't say my name right." All right. Of course they didn't say your name right. We all come from different backgrounds, right? So teach the pronunciation of your name. Great way to connect. What if someone misunderstands something that you said, right? Well, of course, you want to be able to ask a question, right? Does that make sense? Was that clear? Do you see what I mean? Ask that kind of question to verify, check to see if people do understand, right? But also, you should probably explain things as simply as you can and add details to support what you're saying or examples to support what you're saying, just in case the main thing was not clear, right? So keep what you say as simple as you can, as Lina suggested. Great suggestion. And then find an example or an anecdote that supports that, right? That then makes it click. We want it to click, right? And if they didn't understand the first thing you said, when they hear the example or the anecdote, then now they understand. Now it clicks, right? They were about to say, "Sorry, what do you mean by that?" But now they don't need to because they understand the example that you gave to support it, right? And as Lina said, now is not the time to try out new words, new grammar, stuff that you're not very familiar with. Now's probably not the best time, right? What if you miss something important, right? Whether it's a cultural difference, a cultural misunderstanding, or something that was said. Ask, right? Show that you want to learn, that you want to understand, that you're proactive by asking. Could you explain that? Could you repeat that? Would you mind repeating that? Do you think you could clarify that for me? We talked about this in a previous lesson, how to ask these follow-up questions. But this is a perfect opportunity to connect, to have a conversation, to get more information, to ask a question. So the main idea, I think, for all of these is when you have cultural misunderstandings, when you have general misunderstandings, when you have language misunderstandings, use those as an opportunity to make a connection. That's the main idea, okay? All right. So that's pretty much the end of our main part of our lesson. Now we can get into the Q&A. If you have any questions, I'm going to do a brief recap, and then we can get into our Q&A, okay? I wonder if you've ever had any misunderstandings due to culture. Have you ever experienced anything like this? cultural misunderstandings, misunderstandings because you said something and others didn't understand, maybe a faux pas, someone else made one or you made one, someone didn't know how to say your name, something like that. Feel free to share one. Potter, hello. Oh, my day, I'm way too late. Did I miss a lot of fun? Yeah, I would say that you did, Potter. You missed it. You came late to the last one too, I believe, if I remember right at the end, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So we talked about how to generally pitching and how that means seeing your true value, but then communicating that with storytelling principles, with hooks, with great organization, following an outline, making it personal, using anecdotes, all of that stuff that we've talked about, right? We talked about how if you have to talk through your experience for 10 minutes, it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be and then. It can be more interesting, right? Try to make it engaging, make it fun, right? Make it something that people want to hear, like a story, right? People want to be engaged no matter the situation, even if they're sitting there in a professional suit. People want to have something more than the and then, right? So we want to avoid that. And also, we talked about how we have this very multicultural world with language differences, cultural differences, and this is a great chance for more connection, for more interaction, for more conversation, for more understanding, right? So use those misunderstandings for that, for connection, okay? All right, so if you have any questions, now is a great time to ask. This is, as I said, this is our last lesson in our 5-lesson series, our 5-lesson interview series. It's been a lot of fun for me. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope you have too. I'm not sure if we'll be doing other series in the future. It depends, I suppose, but it's been great to do this one. And I hope you've got a lot out of it. But again, if you have any questions now, we've got a few minutes here to talk through them. If not, then not, I suppose. Let me see if I missed any earlier questions. Can't believe we got Sherlock Holmes here. What an honor. I'd appreciate, says Lina, I'd appreciate some tips about answering salary expectation questions without looking materialistic. Yes. So actually, I'm going to recommend, Lina, that you go to the previous lesson and watch through that. And the reason I say that is because that is exactly what we talked about. We talked about salary expectations, but let's see. We had some specific phrases that we used. I'm trying to look at the phrases we talked about. I'm just pulling this up. So one example that we did, if you go back, you can see this in the previous lesson. We said, how do you do this? Right? You don't want to look too materialistic, but you want to get paid well, right? Given my experience and skill set, a salary range between X and Y would be reasonable, I think. So that's saying this is what is reasonable. This is what I should get. This is based on my experience and what I know how to do, right? So given my experience and skill set, a salary range between X and Y would be reasonable, I think. I'm open to discussing the range, but my ideal starting salary would be somewhere between X and Y. So those two are the ones we talked about. Not that those are the only ones, of course, but let me just pop those into the chat. Yeah, these are the ones that we went over in the last lesson. But yeah, I mean, it's asking for a salary is not materialistic. They want to know what you think you should be paid. It's not materialistic because all jobs that have a salary need to have a number, right? We got to get to a number. We have to agree on that number. And so they probably just want to have that conversation. They don't think that you're being materialistic generally. Okay. Let's see. It was useful a lot, says Esther. Thanks for saying so, Esther. Oh no, gotta subscribe to this channel so I won't miss any lessons, I guess. Yes, Potter, absolutely. Subscribe to Pearson English. You can subscribe to Pearson English on YouTube, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn, Pearson English. Lena says, actually, I usually expect that companies already have a starting salary range. They may, but if they ask you the question, what would be your ideal starting salary, you get to state that. It's different for every company, but there's sometimes that range that they're willing to accept is broad. And if their range that they're thinking is between 1 million and 2 million a year, and you say 100,000, well, then you're way too low, right? So, $1 million a year, of course, is a crazy number. What do you think about? What do you think on small class lessons? Small lessons are good. I think those are good. What kind of cultural misunderstandings did you face during your job activities in China? Thank you for answering. Well, that's good. So one time, I'll just share a quick story, and then I think we can call it a day, friends. So apparently, in China, well, this is what I learned. When you do a toast, a sort of a cheers, there's a social thing there where if I'm younger and less experienced, then my glass should be lower than yours, right? So there was this big company event. And one of the things that we had to all do is, there were 200 people there, but each table had to go around and toast the person at each table. And we went up to the director of this company, the CEO of the company, right? And I had no idea. And we clinked our glasses together. And I put mine way higher than his. And I saw a look on his face, like he went like that. And then we came back to our table, and the people I was sitting with said, do you know what you just did? They said, listen, let us. Okay, so that was then a perfect opportunity. I said, what happened? What did I do? And they said, okay, when you do a toast, you put your glass lower than the other person if they're older than you, more experienced than you, sort of have a higher status than you in this situation. Okay. So I asked him more questions about it. Great. This is a great opportunity for me to learn, right? So that's just one example, but I'm sure there are a million others I could talk about. All right. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for being here for this 5-lesson series. Again, as I said, it's been a lot of fun for me. It's been great to share with you. I hope you've learned a lot. Feel free to share these lessons. If you haven't seen the others, go back and watch those. Don't forget to subscribe to Pearson English on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Have a great rest of the week. Have a fantastic weekend. That is all for me. Thank you so much, and hope to see you at some point in the future. Bye, everybody. Take care.